Okay, so we are now live with Rose King, our guest expert for today, that I'm so excited to have. She's coming to us all the way from Israel, which is pretty cool. I don't think I've ever done a Zoom meeting or a live with somebody in Israel, so that's pretty neat. Rose is an integrative holistic health, I did it again, an integrative holistic life coach. And she's also a certified yoga teacher and has a master's degree in criminology. So she's got a wealth of knowledge and expertise on everything from trauma and coaching and yoga. She's going to talk to us today about building a relationship with yourself and learning how to survive and thrive through that. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Rose and let her introduce herself a little bit more and share more about herself. So take it away, Rose.
Thank you. Thank you, Shelby. So yeah, my name is Rose King. I am a holistic life coach. I'm currently based in Tel Aviv, Israel. And I'll just tell you a little bit about my background and what got me to where I am today, because I think it's really relevant for this group, especially because it's a group of sober women. And I think that it's really powerful and inspiring because I myself am a recovered alcoholic, drug addict. I'm sober 8.5 years. And my process in recovery has been a lot of ups and downs, just like many of you, I'm sure. And the most important things that I've had to find is this new identity. For me, most of my life was either drinking or drugging, for a large majority of my teenage years and adolescence and early adult years. And when I got sober, it really didn't have the tools to have this relationship with myself. I didn't understand what it meant to have a relationship with myself. I thought it was kind of a bunch of mumbo jumbo, and it was really important to me, especially about 4.5 years ago. I kind of hit a fork in the road. And I had been sober for a while and things were going really well. I had gone back to school, but I was still really miserable. And I was still very much living in this shame and this victim mentality. I was very much still anxious all the time and fearful and pretty unhappy. I didn't even recognize the fact that I was unhappy until later on. But and thus I began this really long journey that involved learning a ton of different skills along the way, including I did my master's degree in criminology. I spent 3 years studying personality traits. I myself have a history of complex PTSD and had to go through a lot of growth and trauma therapy and really work on that. I did my yoga teacher training and eventually took a coaching class because I really wanted to learn how to bring my experiences to every woman, to every woman, not just sober women, but to everyone, because I think it's really important. And all of the things that I've learned in my path have gotten me to where I am. And for me, it's a life that I'm thriving in my life today. And I no longer feel that weight that I was walking around with for so long, especially sober, because I've learned new tools along the way. And so some of that is what I'm gonna bring to you tonight. So I'm gonna go ahead and just begin sharing my PowerPoint presentation. Give me 1 second, sorry. Here we go. Okay. hopefully the video of me is not obstructed. So the title of this presentation is All Things Self, going from surviving to thriving through building a relationship to yourself. It's kind of the crux of a lot of the work that I do with clients, and I am going to try to bring it to you and give you a lot of value for this really short period of time. So if you have questions along the way, please ask them. Shelby might be able to relay them back to me, or I can see them in the comments after and answer them after. So the objectives of today. So we're going to talk about the differences between the survival mentality and thriving. So survival, like this survival mentality and thriving mode, survive and thrive, is a spectrum. And we're really going to get into what it means. And my goal is to give you some tools to evaluate where you are on that spectrum and where you want to be. Because so much of the work I do with clients is working out like what's our ideal self? Where do we want to go? What's the direction? And then once you have that in mind, once you have this clear picture, or maybe not so clear, but some idea, then it's easier to learn the skills, to learn the tools, to do what's necessary in order to get there. And most of you have already experienced that because you're already sober, maybe you're in recovery, maybe you go to 12 steps, maybe you've done something else, whatever it is, but you've already started your journey. So you're already in this process. And sometimes just being able to evaluate the spectrum, say like, okay, maybe today I'm a little bit down here and I want to get a little bit over here. Like, what do I need to do in order to do that? Like, that's what I want to give you today. So in order to do that, we're going to first examine the stages of relationships and how we can apply them inward. So I like to take modalities and theories from all types of psychology, sociology, and really examine that on a personal level. So how is it relevant to me? How is it relevant to you? So the 4 stages of I like to use the 4 stages of relationships. Now keep in mind, there are lots of different theories that talk about different stages of relationships. But today we're going to talk about the 4 stages of relationships, and I'm going to explain exactly for you what that means as it relates to you personally. So for example, the first stage, euphoria. Second stage is like the early attraction, that early attachment. And then you have crisis, and then you have the deep attachment. And so I'm going to tell you what that means for you. So you can look at yourself and you can look at your relationship with yourself and say, okay, am I in this euphoria stage? Am I in this crisis stage? Where am I? And if you didn't know this already, the stages of relationships are dynamic and they're changing. They are not linear. It's not like you go from euphoria to early attachment to crisis, and like you go in and out of all of them. So just keep that in mind as you're in this process, that nothing is stuck. Like nothing is linear, nothing is perfect, and we're all just trying to find our way. Then we're going to talk about the different components of the self-concept. Sounds like a really big idea, the self-concept. And this is where all things self come in. So all things self is really just a fun way of talking about self-confidence, self-esteem, self-love, self-care, self-efficacy, self-judgment, like all of the things that we put the word self in front of, that's our self-concept. And that's what shapes our identity, and it influences all areas of our lives. And we're going to get into that, and we're going to talk about each one, and we're going to talk about how we can use this model to deepen that relationship to ourselves. So how we can use this model to bring ourselves into the thriving mentality. And that's really kind of an overview. My goal is for you guys to have new tools for living in the thriving mentality, for you to have a new way of looking at, self-love, self-care, all the selves, and really have some independence in your own process. So that's kind of my goal for you this evening. So now we're going to dig right in and start with talking about the survival mode. So we're going to talk about the different characteristics of the survival mode first. It's really important that we understand what that looks like, because it will help us on that spectrum. So we can talk about it as it relates to physical, mental, and emotional characteristics. So first, we're going to talk about the physical ones. You have an activated flight or flight response. Fight or flight response, sorry. There's also freeze. We don't really talk about it so much. You can see in the image that I have for you in the PowerPoint that it lights up in that green area. That's your amygdala. That's your emotion processing center. So when people experience trauma, that area is often overstimulated, which causes long-term effects in the brain. And that's why you're in survival mode for so long, because of this activation in that specific area. The orange area that you see is the area of the prefrontal cortex. That's our logical brain. That's where we have our executive functionings. And that's what develops in adolescence and early adulthood. It doesn't finish developing until around age 25. So as we get more into the physical characteristics of survival mode, you can have an elevated blood pressure or heart rate, sleeping problems and fatigue, changes in eating behaviors. You can gain weight or lose weight. These are some, these are not all. There's a lot more, but often it might remind you of some of the physical effects that you feel when you're anxious. And that is when your survival mode is kicking in, is when you have heightened anxiety, that part of your brain, that green part of your brain, that's what's becoming activated. And when you have prolonged activation in that area, it can result in trauma on a physiological level. Sorry, trauma can happen from external things, lots of reasons why trauma occurs, but I'm talking about on a physiological level, trauma occurs in that green area of the brain. So the mental characteristics, so what's going on in your mind? Fear, anxiety, social anxiety. Can have difficulty remembering and or lack of focus. So recalling details, recalling names, recalling places, all that can be difficult when you're in that survival mode. It can be hard to pay attention, concentration, all those things. It can be difficult to complete tasks and make decisions. And if you find yourself that like you really struggle making decisions because or not knowing what to do and feel like that stuck to overwhelmed sense, that could be an indication that your body, that your mind is in this survival mode. And when you have high levels of stress with poor coping mechanisms, that's one of the triggers for this. And it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle, because the high levels of stress with poor coping mechanisms set off their survival mode, which in turn leads to higher levels of stress with poorer coping mechanisms. And it's just this perpetuating cycle. It's like the snowball effect. And often impulsivity is a sign of being in the survival mode. So we make more rash decisions, more rash choices. We act without thinking. All of those are characteristics of the survival mode. And I also just want to preface that all of the things that I'm saying are characteristics of their survival mode are not certain. So if you have difficulty, if you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I really struggle with making decisions, but I don't think I'm in the survival mode. Like, I don't think I'm in that place. It's okay. Like, you don't have to be in that place. Or if you have trouble paying attention, doesn't mean you're in the survival mode. I'm just giving you an idea of some of the characteristics that can occur in the survival mode. These are not for certain. So emotional characteristics. Sorry. That's what hits home for a lot of people. We often feel really insecure when we're in this place of being in the survival mode. We have a lack of confidence or false confidence. We feel alone. We feel helpless. We feel powerless. We feel overwhelmed. We're overly emotional. We can be overly emotional, or we can be numb. It can be somewhere in between. We can be hypersensitive, and often we're reactive. And one of the things that I really had to learn throughout my process was how to respond and not react. And I'm sure that you've heard that before, to respond rather than to react, pause. And reaction is a survival mode characteristic, because we're operating, from that lizard brain. We're operating from that really basic foundation of ourself. And we're not really, our rational mind is not what's guiding us when we're in this place of survival mode. So I hope that's clear. I'm trying to not make it super scientific, but also present all of the information to you. So if you do have questions along the way, please write them down in the chat or in the comments, and I can get back to them after. So now we're going to talk about the stages of our relationships and how to apply them inwards. So the honeymoon stage is that euphoric stage, that beginning. It's often when if you're talking about meeting a spouse, that beginning, 0 to 6 months, everything's exciting, everything is new. In recovery, we often talk about it like that pink cloud. It's euphoric, and it often feels really good. And actually, there's a certain chemical that's released in our brain that is tied to this stage. And that's one of the reasons why it feels so good. And we often feel that in early recovery. I don't know if you experienced this. I definitely experienced it, even though my early recovery was not really pleasant. But there was this period of okay, I got through all the hard stuff. Now, everything is new. It's like I saw the world through new eyes. And then life started to kick in. And that's that early attachment phase. Every day isn't a challenge, but maybe we still struggle. So self-esteem and self-confidence, those are things that are often tied to this early attachment phase, because we're still coming into ourself. We're still finding ourselves. So we're not really sure of who we are and where we're going. And it's that really beginning stage that's fun, because you can try new things, and for me, this is where I started finding meditation. I got really into meditation, where I started really developing my relationship with yoga. I had been doing yoga before, but this is where I really found my passions, was in this early attachment phase. And then there's the crisis stage, and we all face it. So one way to look at this crisis stage is either we stay in survival mode or we move forward. It's like a make it or break it kind of situation. So if you're, at that fork in the road of trying to make that a big decision where it seems really, really hard, that can also be a crisis stage. You know, everybody is different and everybody is individual. It doesn't have to be this really melodramatic experience. It can be small. But a crisis stage forces us to look in the mirror and really like sit and think, what do I want to do? And often that's, you know, what brings you to coaching, what brought you maybe to this group, you know, what brings you maybe to therapy or to search out something new is this crisis stage where, and it could be that things are not all bad, but maybe things could be better. And then you have this deep attachment, and that's the place where thriving happens. So we're secure in ourselves and we're stable. We've learned coping mechanisms and life kind of feels calm. Self-awareness blossoms. And often when I'm working with other women, especially women in sobriety, that they talk about like life is boring. And it's not because it's really boring, it's just because they're not living in chaos anymore. And that is kind of what that deep attachment feels like. It's like things are not in chaos all the time. And we feel like good, we're content. We've kind of learned how to deal with our emotions in a way. We're accepting of ourselves and our situation. We're definitely not in victim mentality. We're not living like that. We're thriving. We're doing really well. Doesn't necessarily mean we're doing well in all areas of our life, but for the most part, we're doing really well. And I just want to reiterate, I mentioned this in the beginning, but this is not a linear process. This is a dynamic process. So you can go from honeymoon to early attachment to crisis, back to early attachment, maybe then to deep attachment, and then to honeymoon. Like, it can look like a hot mess. But for me, when I think about it and I close my eyes and I kind of use these as a guide, I can really gauge where I am in my life. Okay, what stage am I in this relationship with myself? And what stage do I want to be in? And that's kind of the goal, is that we're always like, where do I want to be? Am I good? Am I in this deep attachment place where like, I'm really good? Or am I, you know, in an early attachment stage or a honeymoon stage where I'm like, I know things could be different and I know things could be better and I need to get there and I want to get there. And that's why this is a good kind of overview of beginning to look at the spectrum as we talk about. All the selves. When you look at yourself in the mirror, what do you see? That's the self-confidence, self-love, self-esteem, self-worth, self-value, self-image, self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-care, self-intimacy, our ideal self, self-efficacy, and all of these make up the self-concept. It's our identity, it's our ego, it's huge. So we're going to talk about this because it can be confusing. This idea can be confusing. So Roy Baumeister, I hope I'm not butchering his name. In 1999, he's one of the researchers on self-concept. So in 1999, he wrote that self-concept is the individual's belief about him or herself that includes the person's attributes, the who, and the what the self is. So what it means is that it includes our feelings and our thoughts about ourselves. It's learned. It develops through childhood, adolescence, into early adulthood. It's harder to change the older we get because we get really fixed in our mind about who we are. It influences all areas of our life. In every relationship, every interaction that we have, whether it be with ourselves or with another person, stranger, coworker, husband, wife, doesn't matter. Our self-concept influences that interaction. It's really, really one of the most, it's the biggest thing about ourselves. And it's often why we end up going to coaching, for example. It does not reflect reality. And I just want to reiterate that. It does not reflect reality. Our views on ourselves are not always real. And if you ever had that thought when you look in your mirror that you are not good enough, you are not worth it, you are whatever, it's not real. And it's huge. You know, our self-confidence is so vulnerable. Our self-love, our self-esteem, all of these things are really vulnerable. And often it's just how we view ourselves. So self-efficacy can be a confusing one because it's not one that people hear all the time. It's our judgments of our own abilities. I want to clarify that. So self-intimacy is when we have intimacy with ourselves. You know, not our self-knowledge is what we know about ourselves, whether or not we think we're smart or intelligent or maybe not smart. You know, our self-esteem, how good we feel on the inside, how much we let that radiate out, the self-confidence. Self-awareness is what we think, you know, how much we know about ourselves, how in tune we are to ourselves. And I have to say that for me, it was only when I started doing a ton of work on my relationship with myself that I realized that the self-awareness that I thought I had was so wrong. So wrong. It was so clouded in all of this other stuff. Self-judgment could be on that list. I tried to think of all of the ones I could, and I am sure there are more. And if there's more, if there's something that you struggle with and it's not on that list, make a comment about it. Let me see if I can help you in any way with that specific area, because later on, we're only going to talk about a few of those. I'm going to isolate a few of these, and I'm going to go in detail on how to work on those specific areas. The more we work on this, the stronger our self-concept becomes, and the more we transition into this thriving mode. So now we're going to talk about the thriving mode. So just a quick comparison. Survival versus thrive. So survival mode, we're full of fear. It's unmanageable fear. It might include social anxiety. It's an activated flight or fight response. Fight or flight, also freeze. However, in the thrive mode, you're able to work through your fear. It is manageable. Your fear is not holding you back. It is just something that exists. For example, you might be exhibiting anxiety, like some people that really struggle with Public speaking, for example. They might get really anxious before. They might even throw up. They might be sweating through their clothes. It doesn't mean that they're at that time, they're at that moment, they're in survival mode. It doesn't mean that in their life they're in survival mode. It can be a timing thing. But in general, if you're able to get on that stage and push through it and do that presentation, do that public speaking engagement, you're working through your fear. That's thriving. Survival mode is hard to make decisions. And when you thrive, you're making decisions rationally and with ease. You know, it doesn't become so difficult because you have all of the tools at your disposal. You know to make that pro and con list. You know to consult with your support system. You know to go inside and see what is your intuition saying. All of that happens when you're thriving. Survival, we're often overly emotional or numb. It's usually kind of black and white. In thriving, you're connected to your emotions, but you're not consumed by your emotions. So you could be angry, but it's not overwhelming. It just is. It passes. Connecting to our emotions, understanding our emotions, and understanding that there's really no good and bad emotions, they're just our emotions, that happens in the thriving mode. Surviving, often we have difficulty with trust. It's not easy to connect to others or develop new relationships. And that's because we're in this constant fight or flight mode. We are just trying to survive. But in thriving, you can trust and connect to others, make friends and have relationships. All that happens in thriving mode. Surviving, we react. Thrive, we respond. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean we're perfect. I just want to make that clear. Sometimes we still react. That's okay. We are always trying to strive for being better. I speak from experience because I have had that happen recently where I reacted to a situation, I did not pause, and I am human. And it's important that I'm able to laugh and I'm able to recognize that. In their survival mode, most often our self-concept is weaker in this state. So that's when we really struggle with self-love, self-care. Self-care is a big one. We neglect ourselves when we are in this survival mode. We eat poorly, sleep poorly. And I am making it black and white because I want you to understand that there is a spectrum. And I found this diagram that I really liked about the spectrum. So the red zone is the survival zone. Frantic, fearful, frustrated. Sorry, I get with my words sometimes. Cortisol and adrenaline rises. I'm not going to go over all of these, but because I went over them earlier, but this is like when we are awake in our mind and that lizard part of the brain is activated. That's the really like the black of the survival. And you can see I'm pointing to my PowerPoint presentation like you can see, but the red, the threat protect state, that's survival mode. The blue is the thriving, flow, flourish, peace, possibility, calm, connect, create, confident, all of the things that we just talked about, resiliency, cardiovascular and immune health, happy neurochemicals, problem solving, the rational mind, that's what takes over. That's the blue. And at any given time, you can be on a spectrum. So you can be in the orange, you can be in the yellow, you can be in the green. you can also be in the red and the blue. And when you look deep down, deep inside of yourself, you can really look at this chart and say, okay, I'm in the yellow, or I'm in the orange, or maybe today I'm in the red. Maybe today is a really, 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 really hard day and I'm in the red. So what can I do about it? And that's what I want to give you. But what can I do about it? So what can we do about the surviving and how do we get to the thriving? And that's what we're using this relationship to ourselves in order to do. So how to live in the thriving mode. Constant personal growth and development. Personal growth and development does not have to be hard. It can be, and we're going to talk about this more, it could be reading a book, spiritual book, it could be praying, it could be talking to a friend, but it's the idea that we're trying to make ourselves better all the time, that we believe that we can always grow and develop, that we can always improve, that we are not perfect. And when we live in that state of understanding that we're not perfect, but also understanding this is in our control to do something about it, that's when we step in the thriving mode. We can cultivate a deep relationship with yourself, ourself, solid self-concept. And this is what we're going to talk about. I wanted to say for the constant personal growth and development one, that this is when we fix our shit. Go through our baggage, work on our baggage. Maybe that means that we're going to therapy. That means we're dealing with the weight of our past. It's setting us free. It's letting us go. If you imagine that weight is actually being weight that's going on your back, holding it on a backpack, it is really heavy. And when you let it go, it's like, and that's what the thriving mode feels like. It feels like, okay, going back to the self-concept. So part of this is really getting to know our emotions and understanding that, am I controlling them or are they controlling me? Emotions are a tricky thing because everybody has their own idea about emotions. But it's pretty common knowledge that emotions are, that we have emotional reactions based on our thoughts. And one thing that I learned in early recovery was that emotions are not fact, which took me forever to understand, because when I was feeling really angry, I was certain that was a fact. Oh, I see chats. Okay, I just saw that there was chats. Yeah, so feelings are not facts. And it might be hard to grasp that when you're in the survival mode. But when you're in the thriving mode, it's really clear that emotions and feelings, which can be used interchangeably, that they just exist and they're not good or bad. They just are. And when we feel something, I teach this to my clients. I told you I'm a holistic life coach, so which means that I really like to incorporate the body into my work, and I don't believe that there's a separation between the mind, the body, and the soul. And so in my work, I teach that emotions are vibrations in our body. They're energy in our body. So if you feel angry, That's a physical feeling. That's a physical sensation. And if you feel sadness, I used to say when I was younger that it's like I had this black hole inside my chest, and everything felt like it was being sucked into this black hole. And I later understood that that's what anxiety felt like for me, but I didn't have the word anxiety in my vocabulary. So I just used that description. Or sadness. Some people talk about that pit in their stomach feeling, or panic. We often exhibit these same vibrations, these same feelings with the typical positive emotions. Happiness, butterflies in the stomach, or when your cheeks get all nice and red when you're happy. My nose gets really red. Anyways, so that's when we get to know our emotions, is when we're in this is when we're working on this self-concept. We're working on all the selves. And we can understand, is this emotion controlling me? Or am I controlling it? Do I have the power to say, okay, I can release this emotion? And you do. So daily self-care practice is really big, and I'm going to talk more about that because I think it's really important for anybody, especially women that are in coaching programs, and it is key to living in a thriving mode. A solid support network and community, accountability and responsibility, all of these things help us. Instead of self-perpetuating a negative cycle, it self-perpetuates a positive cycle. It keeps us staying in this thriving mode because it's like positive reinforcement for what we're doing. And when you have that solid support networking community, they can relay back to you if you're not doing so well. And maybe if that's something that you need to look at it right now, maybe you're acting impulsively and you don't recognize that, or reacting and not responding and you don't recognize that. So we can use our support network as kind of like a mirror for our own behavior. And accountability and responsibility helps us stay good in ourselves. People that are accountable and responsible to something else are often more responsible to themselves. Ooh. Okay. How do we thrive through building a relationship with ourselves? So these are the ones that I think are most easy to work on in terms of actually doing work. So self-care. We often think that self-care means going out to get manis or pedicures, or going to buy that dress, or getting that massage. And yes, self-care can be those things. Self-care can also be doing a deep clean of the closet. It can also be doing a really yummy yoga YouTube video, going for a walk, taking 5 minutes to just sit, putting your feet up, spending an extra 5 minutes in the shower. There are it is an endless list of self-care. And if this is something that you're struggling with and you're looking for tips, I have a really great worksheet that helps you kind of diagram and think of new ideas. I personally believe that if you're targeting a mind, body, and soul self-care practice every week, so every week you're doing something for your mind, every week you're doing something for your body, and every week you're doing something for your soul, that is the way to really work on self-care. That when you target those 3 areas, you're working with the whole individual. If you're just doing exercise, you're neglecting a whole big part of yourself. That's the brain. This can also include so we're going to talk about self-intimacy, which is a big one. So the intellectual component of self-intimacy, reading books. I love reading books. I read books like novels. I read personal development books. I read books that make me better at my job. All of these have a different place in my life. Some of the books, like some of the personal development books, are part of my self-care practice. Some of the novels are part of my self-care practice. It's about the intention. So for self-care, it's about the intention. And that's really what I want to make clear, that if you are somebody that really enjoys cleaning, that's okay. That can be part of your self-care practice. If your intention is that you are doing this for yourself, if you're doing it because you have people coming over, or because it's expected of you, or because it's Monday and you clean the house on Mondays, then I'm sorry, it doesn't really count as self-care. But if you're feeling it, do it. So self-intimacy. So intimacy, there's 5 different types of intimacy. So we have physical and sexual intimacy. So important. Pleasure yourself. I know that can be weird and shocking, but it's really important that you get to know yourself, because if you don't know what you like, then no one else is going to be able to figure that out. And if you don't have a partner and you just have yourself, enjoy it. You don't need a partner to pleasure yourself. Enjoy that space that we have been given. Physical intimacy is key. They're not the same things. Physical and sexual intimacy are not the same things. Hug yourself. Give yourself a massage. Touch your body. Put on lotion. Those things are really like, get to know your body. And that's what intimacy is all about. Intimacy. Into me, I see. Develop this relationship with yourself. Emotional intimacy is about getting in touch with your emotions as it relates to yourself. Spiritual intimacy, for me, I meditate, I do yoga, I study new philosophies, I read new books. All of that for me falls under spiritual intimacy. Intellectual intimacy, you could take a class, try something new. Experiential intimacy, experiential means to try something new. Experience life. Take a yoga class, take a Pilates class, take a pottery class, take that dancing class you've always wanted to do, whatever it is, just do it for yourself. See if you like it. You might think that you like something and then it turns out you don't even like it. I had that relationship with Pilates. I don't particularly like Pilates, but I didn't know until I went to a Pilates class. Self-love, self-confidence, and self-worth. Those are huge and really heavy and often really hard. And I don't have quick tools for each individual one, but I can tell you that 2 things that have really helped my clients, that I use a lot in my practices and a lot in my work with others, is mantra and positive affirmations. And I just want to say with positive affirmations that they need to be short sentences and they cannot have the word not in the sentence. So for example, if you say, I am not stupid, our brain doesn't register that. Our brain just hears, I am stupid. So you're doing the opposite of your intention. So keep the sentence positive. That's why it's called a positive affirmation. that might not be common knowledge, I don't know, but I think it's important to mention. Saying over and over again, when you're feeling down, I am enough, is enough to change your thoughts, is enough to give you that peace of mind. I am worthy. I am enough. I am loved. I am capable. I believe in myself. I can do it. All of these are really, really strong. And when you say them over and over again, and you believe them from this emotional place on the inside, from your heart, that's when it begins to change what's going on in the mind. And that's when we begin to change our relationship with ourselves. I often, in my yoga teaching and work with clients, I often, at the end of practice, say, thank yourself for showing up for yourself today. And for clients that really struggle with this self-love and self-worth, they often cry in this place because it's so heavy. And it really is like, thank yourself for showing up for yourself today. Sometimes that's all we need to do. And sometimes that's all we can do. And then we move. We have this ideal self, a vision board. Where do we want to go? That will help us figure out how to get there. And that is the ultimate guide for figuring out, through building this relationship with ourselves, is this ideal self. I talked a lot about so many different things. And I just wanted to summarize and give you some important points to take home. All the selves are changeable. You have that power. We have that power. Self-love, self-respect. Oh, self-respect wasn't on the list. See, forgot that one. Self-love, self-respect, self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-judgment, self-care. All of these things can be changed. None of this is fixed. And that is in your hands. And if you feel like you can't do it on your own, then you have the power to ask for help. Ask Shelby, Google, whatever it is. I mean, that's what brought you to this. Probably this is what brought you to coaching, because something in yourself was not 100%. So I want to stress that. Our relationship to ourselves is dynamic, not linear. I talked about that a lot. The more we work on aligning our current self with our ideal self, the more we live in this thriving mode. So the more you work on where you want to be, the more you're living in that thriving place. You're living in that blue. You're living in that ease. And thriving doesn't mean everything is good all the time. But it does mean that we can handle things when they arise without crisis, that we are connected to all of our emotions, the good ones and the bad ones, and that we're able to connect to others and learn how to trust, that we are trustworthy. And that's really important. And we can use the pieces of our self-concept as a tool for living in the thriving mentality. You can look and say, oh, I'm really struggling with my self-love today. And if you really look at the surviving and thriving in that spectrum, if you're really struggling with self-love today, probably you're not as blue as you could be. And you can look at that and you can, okay, what can I do for self-love today? How can I thrive more? How can I add thriving points into my life? And that's really what I wanted you to take home from this presentation, was that you can use the selves, you can use the stages of your relationship. You can use the spectrum of surviving and thriving, the spectrum of surviving to thriving as a way for you to grow and to build that relationship with yourself. And I just want to end with these two quotes. You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. It's C.S. Lewis. And the secret of change is to focus all of your energy, not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And that's Socrates. And these two quotes have been paramount for me in my life, in my practice. And so I've really enjoyed giving you this information. Thank you for having me. And if you want to read more about me or check out my Instagram, my website is Rose King Coaching and my Instagram is Rose King Coaching. And I am really, really just happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. And I'm so glad you shared your contact information. I was going to ask you how people could get a hold of you if they wanted to. And so there you go. Her website is listed right there, rosekingcoaching.com. Her IG name as well, Rose King Coaching. And I'm sure that people will be doing that. This was a power-packed session. I really appreciate everything that you have laid out here for all of the women to see. The material is so aligned with the work that I'm doing as well. I mean, I think you and I are pretty aligned on our views around, the self and around, especially in recovery work. There's so much work to be done on the self when we are recovering, because an active addiction, we are not our best selves. We kind of lose ourselves in a way, in many ways. And what I see a lot of the time when I'm working with women is a sense of trying to find themselves, and I don't even think they even know, particularly in early sobriety, in those first couple years, and then beyond that as well, where you're kind of like, who the heck am I? What do I even like? I hear that from women sometimes too. I don't even know what I like, or I'm not even sure what I want. And I get that, because when you're in active addiction, you're just serving that addiction the whole time. And we're not even connected with the things that light us up. We're not connected with joy or positive energy in any way. It's really just, even if we are high functioning, we're living a life where we're, seemingly doing all the things. We're just not. So I love all the things. Feelings are not facts is one of the phrases I use regularly. I love your self-care. You explain self-care exactly the way I do. Self-care is not only manicures and massages. I even talk in the membership in Sober Freedom Inner Circle around using our hygiene routines as a form of self-care, because I do a lot around, I use, like, for example, I use an oil face wash that I make myself. It's an amazing opportunity to give myself 2 minutes of just self-care, right? I give myself a facial massage. I kind of allow that amazing material to soak into my skin, and I use a warm washcloth to sort of press it in. And it seems kind of silly, and like, sometimes I'm, more rushed than others, but it does take a few minutes, and I'm really caring for myself in that moment. And I feel like we minimize that in our society. We minimize those opportunities where we're really, like, long showers for me is another form of self-care, because often we're very rushed in the morning. We're trying to get out the door. We're busy with kids, and so an opportunity where I have, like this morning, I had a little extra time where I can stand in there for a little bit longer, really spend time with, I use essential oils and I just smell them and I lather it up, and I give myself an extra 5 minutes to just stand in the water and enjoy that experience. That is self-care. And it's also, it's when we do those small things, they're not small, but when we do those things, they add up and they compound to create self-love that really makes a huge difference in our concept going forward, because it takes all of these little tiny things packaged up together over time to make a huge difference. So we are right on the same page with everything they're learning in the membership. So I really appreciate you reinforcing that. And again, this will live right in the Facebook group, and you can respond to comments, or I will shoot anything your way. Hopefully people will reach out to you if they want to hear more. And I really appreciate you being here with us. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. All right. Well, I will see you next time and let you know if there's anything that comes up in the group.
Great.
All right.